The Hypnorotica Podcast. Recorded November 28th, 2015. Tonight on the Hypnorotica Podcast, Marvel's Jessica Jones. So it just seems natural that we need to talk about Jessica Jones after it coming out. I think it's, at least in my recent memory, one of a mainstream show that has involved mind control as a central plot element more than any other show that I can think of.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's been a ride watching that show. We're gonna try and avoid spoilers for like the first half of this podcast, but I'm going to give a warning right now. There's going to be a ton of spoilers as we go on.
Right, yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to set up sort of a bridge saying, okay, we're going to start talking about plot elements of the show now.
Right. So I think this is kind of just, a logical extension of the whole, superhero things are becoming so much more mainstream, basically. I mean,
exactly.
Avengers, one of the top grossing movies ever, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And almost all these movies have had some degree of mind control in them.
Yes, and for a very important reason, because you need to have the heroes fight each other at some point, and mind control is just such a convenient way to get that done.
Yeah, it really is. There's a few other interesting elements to it, too. I mean, I kind of feel cheap in regards to the Avengers, how it was done. Just a little bit, because it's like, oh, we're just going to take these people out of the plot because reasons. I thought it was kind of interesting how they did it with Scarlet Witch, at least a little bit, but I don't have particularly strong feelings on that one either.
Right.
I'm maybe not the biggest fan of the Avengers on multiple rewatches, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Really good at the time, and then as you watch it again and again and again, it kind of falters. And I think that's kind of a thing that reoccurs with almost all mind control stories, because they're generally built around the twist that people are mind controlled. Right.
Usually you don't... I think maybe that's the biggest one here, is that usually it's a very flash-in-the-pan thing. It's, if you have an entire TV series, there's one episode where suddenly mind control makes an event to twist things around. But here, it's just omnipresent everywhere you go in the entire show.
Yeah, it is the, the only reason the villain's scary. I mean, the primary reason he's scary.
Yeah, and it is just sort of a horrifying power in the sense, because especially I like how they start off just not explaining the rules at all.
I mean, rules-wise, it's kind of weird, and that's going to, quickly approach spoiler territory if we go into the exact mechanics of the rules.
Right, I think we can go as far as to just give the general sense of what he can do, at least, maybe we can go as spoily as far as if you've watched the trailer, we can discuss things that seem to be indicated there, where, Kilgrave, or which is adapted from Marvel Comics, the Purple Man, and I'm very happy that they did not make him actually purple.
Yeah, I am too. That would have been really silly looking.
Exactly. There's some things that work in comics that just will never translate into live action, but so, it starts off he just seems ridiculously overpowered, where he just walks up to someone and then you do whatever he says and feel whatever he tells you to feel.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you actually feel whatever he tells you to feel. It seems to be generally regarded that people don't actually change their internal thought process.
Right, well... I guess you could have a little bit of contention of that. I was thinking of some of the descriptions. What sort of got to me was, and this sort of fits into the main idea, how the mind control is such a perfect metaphor for PTSD and other forms of trauma that people have gone through.
Yeah, it's a lot to do with abusive relationships in general, I think.
I'm specifically thinking of one description. I don't think this really counts as a spoiler, but Kilgrave just opens the door of this guy's car as he's parked on the street and tells him, you'd like to drive me around. and then notices that his infant son is crying in the background, and then says, "You'd like to leave your son here." And so the man, because of Kilgrave's power, complies. And as he's describing it later on, he says he felt just absolutely horrible as he did it. But he described it as because it was what I wanted to do. And so there's this sense of he does have the ability to control sort of your emotions, but it doesn't dull you to what you're doing. And so it becomes, I want to do this horrible thing. I'm a horrible person. And so his mind control is just can inherently damage people that way, just beyond the dealing with the effects the actions that they're taking.
This reminds me of the what experiment was that where they made someone shock someone else?
The Milgram experiment.
Yes, the Milgram experiment. People would keep doing it even though they were basically crying and really didn't want to.
Right. And yeah, it does have a lot of similarities to that. And so it is mostly just a power of controlling what people do, but there does seem to be some level. And then I guess you sort of get into the mix of there. And that's what a lot of people are grappling with once they're finally out of Kilgrave's control, is trying to come to terms with what they did. And
yeah, even if it was really simple, like the trendy guy who gave away his shirt or whatever.
He gave away his coat.
But I mean, it's still a thing. If you have your like autonomy actually like taken from you by force like that, that would be damaging even if you did a relatively simple thing.
Exactly. And then it leads to to a lot of those issues of PTSD where people have gone through traumatic events, and the sense of helplessness or of high alert that can result from it. And
when we when the show first started, I thought we were going to see like a massive uptick in like fetishists,
right,
especially with mind control. Mm-hmm. But after watching, I'm not so sure that's going to be the case.
Yes, and I think, and that's all a testament to how well the writers were at making sure that the tone stayed with the negative connotations of what he was doing, and I think how well David Tennant played the character and showed off.
Actor.
Oh yeah, David Tennant is fantastic, and
so good in that role.
Yes, he was so amazing, and I just will say this as an aside. I think it is so awesome that he used his doctor voice. I will never be able to watch an episode of Doctor Who with him in it again quite the same way.
I know. I've been watching a few just to kind of see things, and it kind of makes you realize how much of an asshole the 10th Doctor really was at times.
Oh yeah. I think that we could create like a little, one of those internet questionnaires. Is this audio file from the Doctor saving people or terrorizing Jessica Jones?
Don't blink. Don't even blink. Blink and you're dead.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a little too iconic. People are going to know it, so...
Oh, yeah, that's very iconic, but I bet you that as you go around, you'd be able to find more of those.
Yeah. I've seen this picture popping up in a few places.
Uh-huh.
I seemed like actually... Like, it affects me. Like, it makes me go, oh my god. But no one else really seems to have the same reaction. I'm not entirely sure why. Mm-hmm. But it's basically this picture that shows... like the difference between like a boyfriend and a lover is a lover can make you smile even when you don't want to, and then it just has a picture of Kilgrave.
Oh god, that's horrible.
See, it gets you too, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. That is something that I've heard pointed out several times. Is the insistence that he uses with multiple people, including the flashbacks where you see that Jessica Jones under his control, where he orders you to smile, and it was pointed out on a different discussion that I saw about the show that's a very common occurrence, a form of street harassment that a lot of women in New York deal with, where they're walking down the street and random men will walk up to them and tell them you should smile.
Oh yeah, this entire series was so fucking loaded with mild feminist critiques, I would say, about just basic society, like trying to express sometimes just the normal hell women have to go through, of course, with the superhero trappings and everything.
Exactly. And I think, yeah, and it's not just that Kilgrave and his mind control is an allegory for PTSD and how people deal with that, but also just, I mean, if you strip out the mind control, he is just an abusive person, and an abusive relationship. He does all of those characteristic things. He blames Jessica Jones for his own actions. He gaslights her. He, tries to justify things. He dangles out the idea of his own redemption as a lure to try to keep her under his control. All of the things that you would associate with any random abusive relationship.
Yeah. There's a thing, and we'll talk about when we get to spoilers, because I have some opinions that are maybe kind of weird and maybe not entirely kosher.
Well, this is what this podcast is for. The podcast of hypnosis fetishists talking about Jessica Jones.
I've really kind of enjoyed a show that made me examine what I find so fetishistic in a very, very cruel and hard way, even if I don't think that was on the author or writer's minds to any degree whatsoever.
Of course not.
I think it's important that everyone kind of has to realize, like, hey, this is your fetish if you played it out in real life without really any acknowledgement of people as they are. As I've grown older, because I mean I've been to some degree engaged with the hypnotism fetishist community. I don't know, it hasn't felt like much of a community lately to me, but that's entirely different too.
Right, and I think
that's probably because I've withdrawn from it a fair bit.
I think there's a big thing with generational shifts, and I think with the nature as the internet and social media has shifted, the area where people are hanging out has shifted a little bit too.
Right.
But
so is the content. It's been a lot of emphasis on short form things, where it used to be more like these big stories and everything.
Right. Yeah. So I remember. I mean, back in the day, it was the Mind Control Story Archive was like the central hub for internet MC enthusiasts to go to. And I was also thinking, remembering, when you go back and sort of scan the plot lines of stories that people were writing, probably at least a third of them sort of boiled down to the power fantasy that it would be to have powers similar to Kilgrave's. But seeing it, so it's a bunch of stories that's sort of like telling Jessica Jones from Kilgrave's perspective.
Yeah. There are a lot of those, and I mean, it's definitely as I've grown older and I've become more experienced with sex and I've had more lovers and all that sort of thing. But I'm not so intrigued by the power fantasy aspect anymore. I really, really have started enjoying the consensual bit. Because the consensual bit makes it more interesting for me. Like, taking something from someone makes me feel bad. But if they give me something, I feel a lot better about it.
Exactly. And
it becomes more meaningful to some different degree.
I think that's probably a pretty common occurrence for people as they sort of work their way through these interests that we have. And sort of figure out exactly what it is about it that we like so much.
I mean, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus because it's not really a good thing to do. And I'm trying to think of how to word this. I don't know if it's a shift that everyone has. I don't know if it's a shift even a majority has. I think there is a very, very, very large segment of people who do not have that shift, and that's that's okay as long as they keep it in fantasy, of course.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and maybe that is something, and we would have to query this further. But people who actually do start experimenting a little bit with actual hypnosis start to have to come to terms with what those divisions are, and they're a little bit more likely to develop their interests.
I mean, a thing you hear on like every video now and every little thing now is like hypnosis can't make you do something you want to do, and I always have to say kind of like this half bullshit to that, because hypnosis is very, very, very effective at abusing people.
Right. I think I described it once that hypnosis can't do anything that that an abusive person couldn't do, but it can, it doesn't give you advanced powers beyond what other people can do, but it can achieve a lot of the things that an abusive relationship can give you without hypnosis.
Yeah, it can definitely make people more vulnerable, because generally if someone's already getting into that vulnerable position to begin with, I mean, they're going to listen to you, even if they really shouldn't.
Right, and this starts breaking into a lot of some of the stereotypes, sort of like our own version of the patriarchy. There's people who will start bandying around about what a proper submissive should be like, and what a proper dominant is, and what behaviors are supposed to be ascribed to these different roles, and start blaming someone if they're not fitting these properly, and saying you're a bad person because you didn't do this thing.
Yeah, and that's really not... It's not how it works. Everyone's pretty unique, and everyone has different tastes and ways they experience things. And you're really looking for compatibility. Like, if you're going to go actively engage in BDSM, or if you're going to engage in, like, hypnosis and stuff, you're going to run into times where you're going to meet someone who does not treat you the best. And that's not to say they failed or anything. That's just you two did not gel correctly. There was misread body signals. There was something. And that's not the end of the world, as long as, they didn't, do something awful. If they
right.
actually, did something awful, well, that is pretty awful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of the same rules that more mainstream BDSM goes through can work real well for this. If there's a problem, you say, okay, we need to stop, and then you talk it over, and you see what was going on with that, and you can decide if you want to keep considering doing a relationship with each other, and what needs to change to make sure that you don't run into those problems.
I mean, even in mainstream BDSM, I think people let themselves be too confident in the safeguards that are set up. People will depend too much on the fact that a safe word will get them out of a situation, and I hate to be the one to break it to them, but it doesn't actually help them out of a situation. At best, what it does is it's a request, and my phone's going off, and I don't care. But it still basically boils down to a request, and it is up to the person who hears the safe word to fulfill it. Mm-hmm. And while that should matter, I mean, you're still at their mercy. They still have to make that final choice of actually letting you go. And that's something I always like to remind people, even then, that's them doing the right thing, and at any point they could do the wrong thing.
Right, yeah. So it's a good safeguard if you can trust the other person.
Yeah, and that's what it boils down to in hypnosis and BDSM and basically anything like this. And all sex, honestly.
Right.
Every last bit of it. You have to be able to trust the person if you really want to,
mm-hmm.
Enjoy it in a meaningful way. I don't know. Maybe that's just the position I take because I'm not... I don't even know where I'm going with that one. I was going to kind of say, women tend to be weaker than men, and so in many things, you're trusting the person not to assault you.
Right.
I mean, that's like a social contract.
Right. There's the old commentary that men are afraid that women are going to make fun of them, and women are afraid that men are going to kill them.
Yeah.
And that sort of dichotomy can be even spread out further in a BDSM context if you're using your safe word while you're handcuffed to a bedpost.
Yeah, because then you have to be worried your dominant will say, "Nah, I'm gonna keep going."
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be worried that I don't know. Really, this sub can't inspire a real worry. I mean, at most you can say, "Oh, they treated me badly, and they're gonna hurt my reputation or whatever," or something like that. But I don't.
Yeah, so it's always a bit of a complicated in and out with stuff like that.
It really is. Things are harder than they first appear, and I am not a giant fan of trying to hand wave through simple things.
Right. But I think shows like Jessica Jones are a good sort of signpost where people can say, okay, let's actually look and see what Kilgrave is doing here, and if I ever find a situation where I'm going, is this something Kilgrave would do? Then maybe I'm heading down the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's you have people that worship characters like House and Walter White and Kilgrave. I mean, I don't think anyone worships Kilgrave.
No, and I think, again, just David Tennant is so perfect at showing the inner side of Kilgrave, and maybe we're starting at this point to get a modicum of spoileriness in this, but I would say
we're going to dive right into spoilers.
Yeah, let's go for this.
Thing I have to say, and if I don't say it, I'm going to lose it.
Okay, so I was going to say is that first, he's got this overwhelming power, but he is as enslaved to it as any of the people that he abuses, because he's actually on the inside incredibly insecure and incredibly shallow.
I have actual sympathy for Kilgrave. I mean, I don't think he's really redeemable. Like, I don't think he can actually be taught a lesson.
Right.
And I don't blame Jessica Jones for essentially saying, hey, no, I'm not going to stay here and fucking be your babysitter for all time.
I had an interesting commentary on that as well. But yeah, I'll get into this. I would even, and again, we're now in full spoiler mode. I can say as you figure out, you learn about Kilgrave's backstory, that he had a neurological condition that was going to kill him. But his parents were scientists, and they tried this experimental, DNA therapy. But it had the side effect of giving him this ability to control anyone who is in range of these sort of retroviruses that he constantly emits. And so he had this power when he was a little 10-year-old, and his parents were helpless to avoid his childish demands, and they finally ran away from him in fear for their own lives. And he grew up having to use the power to survive. And so part of it is just his environment taught him that this was the way to go about the world. And secondly, I think that Kilgrave's power has a certain limitation that sort of makes it harder not to just give in to the control, is that he constantly has to, as Jessica refers to it, re-up on people. He needs to constantly reinforce his commands, or they wear off after half a day. And suddenly those people, if he didn't phrase his commands perfectly enough, would be like, wait a minute, this guy has totally screwed us over.
Yeah. And I think the line that really got me was, I was 10, I had a temper tantrum just like any other 10-year-old.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And it kind of gets you, is he just a bad person, or did he become a bad person? Is it because of the power he had? And I mean, it's a really compelling and kind of interesting story to go with. Like, he didn't intend to be bad at the outset.
Right, exactly.
It's, he was in pain. He had suffered for most of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw his parents as the people who did it to him. And, he didn't understand what they were doing.
Exactly. I mean, most people are not born monsters, but people can sometimes reach the point where there's no going back. But we can't look away from the fact that, and feel some sympathy for the events in their life that caused them to go down that path.
Yeah, it's really, again, with the whole, when Jessica Jones, says, I could stay with him and I might be able to use his powers for good and everything, I can't blame her for a second for betraying him. Not at all.
Oh, right. No, yeah. I think that was true to her character. I mean, that entire episode was called, What Would Jessica Do?
Yeah. I mean, even if it's not just true to her character,
mm-hmm.
if I put myself into her position, I couldn't do it. A guy who kept me for a year as a pet, endlessly raped me, and made it so I could never have, a thought on my own.
Right, yeah, no, I understand her decision entirely. And, as much as I would love to have seen the spin-off Jessica Jones and Kilgrave as an odd couple duo who fight crime together, I think that would be...
sitcom would be really funny.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. He's a sociopathic madman with the ability to take control of anyone. She is a alcoholic ex-superhero who has complete control over his heart. Together, they fight crime.
Yeah, I would watch that show in a heartbeat.
Yeah. No, there is that brief interlude where she sort of takes him out for a test drive to save that one family. And there was an interesting dynamic in there, but the biggest thing for me that comes out, and now we're sort of getting into some bigger spoiler territory, I'm going to say that for the first half, this is like the big twist that you learn in the second half of the show. At first, there's always this concern that Kilgrave is going to come up and just take control of Jessica again, and it's going to be all over. But then he comes to her in this situation, and I'm just going to say I love the sequence where, because he can't have this family come back on him, he has to actively avoid using his control so he can buy Jessica's old childhood home.
Yeah.
I really loved that sequence, and watching just the agony that he goes through, not to just to bandy people about, and because he can't afford to, because this is the first time he's actually trying to set down some roots, and he can't have this family go, wait a minute, I didn't want to sell my house,
exactly
a day later. So he comes to her, and he's giving her this, which again just goes deeper and deeper into the creepy side of Kilgrave, that he buys her old childhood home and then recreates it down to the last detail for her to live in. But so after this, you finally get this amazing twist. Jessica Jones is now immune to his control. And that
she's been the entire time.
She's been immune the entire time, and Kilgrave realized this, but she didn't. And then suddenly, if you think back to that scene where he's saying, I promise I'm not going to control you anymore. Come live with me here, and we'll sort of make this work. And suddenly that's all recontextualized, as he's not really trying to turn over a true leaf. He just knows that he can't control her, and is, he's taking a different tact to try to manipulate her.
That was, I think, like a really impressive bout of writing right there.
Yes.
I think it was only impressive because they revealed later on, it kind of almost happened, like I almost missed it the first time. Mm-hmm. They revealed later on that Kilgrave knew, and without the idea that Kilgrave knew he couldn't do it, it suddenly makes this whole series entirely differently. It just turns on its head, and it's amazing.
Exactly. And then you take the fact that this was all sort of his elaborate attempt to manipulate her, even though he can't control it with his power anymore. And I think him sort of going along with her desires to make him a good guy becomes part of that context. He is dangling out this idea, maybe I can redeem Kilgrave and change him in some way, as just another one of the tools in his box trying to keep control over her.
And it's impossible to tell if he really could be redeemed or not, and that's
right.
That's a thing. I mean, it's hard to tell. It really is. Would he have changed his entire life for Jessica Jones? I don't really think so. I think he could have done it for a few weeks, maybe.
Right. Yeah. And that's again why I was really impressed when Jessica makes the choice to snatch him, because I was guessing that was the way that it was going to go, that there was going to be an episode of her trying this out and then Kilgrave proving that he just wasn't up to it. But I was very happy with the direction they took, where she can't see herself in that role and decides to steal him away and seal him up to try to save Hope and end his reign of terror.
Another thing that might have backfired on him is at that time when she nabbed him, she didn't know he couldn't control her. That's
true.
And so she had to act like that. If she knew, mm-hmm. It could have been different entirely.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I just love the character of Kilgrave so much because of all of the stuff that he goes through. Just the one that really got to me, honestly, was where he just, he went into her apartment and started looking around, and then used her toilet, just the intrusion of her space. And
yeah,
and I find this so hilarious that this I noticed this, but so yeah, there's the guy that's attracted to Jessica that shows up at the door, and Kilgrave makes him kill himself in Jessica's bed. And then so Jessica turns up and sees this. And then on this one shot, I think you can just see just the barest bit of the bed as she's reacting to this, but you can see into her bathroom. Kilgrave left the seat up.
What a dick. I didn't notice that. What a fucking dick.
I know, and I don't know. It was just random chance that I happened to notice that, but that just sort of characterized in all those different ways the utter disregard he has for Jessica's space and autonomy and all of that stuff. And that the very reason that he becomes obsessed with her is that he's the first thing in his life that he's not able to control with his powers. And so his obsession is, I need to make sure that I can control her again.
Yeah.
By whatever means necessary.
It is super easy to see eventually that it's not that he actually loves Jessica, because he doesn't. Mm-mm. He loves the idea of Jessica. He loves the idea of someone strong enough to resist him, but failing in the end.
Right.
Which is a thing I think all of the mind control people can really get behind.
Oh, yeah. I know a couple. I remember from some of the old RPing days, there was a couple of people who, extremely strong women finally falling to their power was like that was their fetish right there. That specific scenario. That's a big one. You can see that in a bunch of different shows too.
Oh yeah. Dexter had an episode based around that, I think in its first season, which also involved hypnosis, mind you.
Oh, wow. I haven't watched that in a long time. Maybe I need to go back to it.
It was with the psychologist who had a thing where he would convince high-powered women to commit suicide. And it was really stupid because it doesn't work that way, but whatever.
Yeah. There's an episode of Gotham where a hypnotherapist is turning her clients into supervillains for her, into a serial killer. Basically, they all don the same mask and take on the same persona.
Yeah, there's a lot of, actually, now that I think about it, a lot of hypnosis uses, even in media, is mostly to take a strong character and break them down. Yeah.
And I think it's also a very, especially why another reason you see it a lot in the comics is because it's so emblematic of, I guess, asymmetrical combat. You've got these people who, can leap over tall buildings or bulletproof and stuff like that. But suddenly now, but they may not have any resistance against attacks to their mind, and so it becomes this brand new challenge.
Yeah, what if like Thor or whatever had tried to confront Kilgrave?
Exactly. And have you ever watched Earth's Mightiest Heroes? It's a cartoon version of the Avengers.
No, I didn't watch it.
Okay. There is an episode featuring around the Vision, who is an android, waking up and finding out that the Avengers have basically taken over the world, and that Iron Man is now the president of the United States, and they're effective dictators. And as he tries to figure out what the hell's going on, he finds out that the Purple Man, Kilgrave, took control of Tony Stark, and Tony Stark used his technology to project Kilgrave's mind control power over the entire planet.
Great.
Yeah, which is kind of, I think, out of character. I haven't read that much of Marvel Comics versions of Kilgrave, but I like this version, which fits in with his sort of his personality, that he's not out to take over the world. He just takes whatever he wants because he can. Anything that's in reach, he can take control of. And
someone described to me that Kilgrave's powers are not just mind control; it is white male privilege.
Exactly.
And it really is. It's kind of this weird thing, and I think a lot of his actions are actually made to kind of demonstrate that.
Yeah.
And I think it's meant to try and, both the white men in that show turned out to be villains.
Right, alright. And though I think, dang it, what's the other guy's name?
Nuke.
Nuke?
His name becomes Nuke. He's another
he's
another comic book character.
Yeah, I figured as much once he started going crazy on him. But I would say
can't remember his actual name because I didn't like him.
But we're talking about the police officer that Jessica Jones's friend Trish insults Kilgrave on air, and then when he calls into the show, that was really chilling.
Oh God, that was so good.
I know it was. It was really awesome.
It only really mattered because I came into the show knowing it was David Tennant. So
yes, but. Yeah. But anyway, so he sends this cop to kill Trish in revenge. And of course, she makes it through and Jessica Jones saves the cops. But now he's basically in the same boat as the rest of the characters now. He's got horrible PTSD from being part of being controlled by Kilgrave.
Yeah, he thought he murdered an innocent woman.
Exactly. So he's sort of in the same boat as Jessica. And the path that he goes down to become Nuke is just sort of showing you one of the ways that people try to cope with their trauma that can lead them down to dangerous paths.
I actually think he was meant to try and exemplify right-wing terrorism, but I'm not sure.
Maybe that's stretching a little bit, but you can sort of... I was actually going to point this out another way, is I think it demonstrates a lot how a lot of people with this trauma, they just absolutely hate the sense of helplessness that accompanies it. Especially when you're dealing with Kilgrave, who just, it makes you helpless to do anything but what he says. And there becomes sort of an obsession to take action to rectify that past trauma. And you see it with this police officer who becomes Nukes, his obsession with killing Kilgrave to the point where he starts acting against Jessica. And you see it with there becomes a support group of former Kilgrave victims who are trying to deal through their trauma. But one rabble-rouser comes in, and some of them people still have that sense of helplessness and the need to take violent action to try to feel less powerless.
Right.
But they don't have a way to focus that constructively, so they end up again attacking Jessica and end up helping Kilgrave all over again.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. So a thing I thought was kind of interesting. There was a single line within the show that I kind of wish was explored more.
Which one is that? Because there were a lot of good lines.
When Kilgrave says, "I didn't make you kill her, you chose to," I said, "take care of her."
Right.
And this was a thing they didn't really explore, and I kind of regret that they didn't, because Jessica Jones is not a hero. She's not a hero in the normal sense, and that's something everyone needs to kind of remember. She didn't object to killing Kilgrave because she didn't want to kill him. She didn't want to kill him because she wanted to keep Hope alive. If Hope wasn't there, she would have killed him.
And that's what eventually happens is, I think, Hope, the victim who was forced by Kilgrave to kill her parents, becomes so obsessed with seeing Kilgrave die as well that she kills herself because she realizes that she is holding Jessica back from that action that she wants to see happen.
Yeah,
that was really a horrifying scene.
Yeah. At first I thought he made her do it, and I was like, oh god.
No, but that was... And maybe, at least, it was her... I was horrible, and I wished she hadn't have done it, but it was her way of regaining her own autonomy.
Yeah, it was the first real decision she'd made since... That was her first real decision in the entire show, actually.
Yeah, she spends a lot of time, not being manipulated by Jessica and the lawyer, but basically being told, you're way out of your league here, just listen to us, we're going to handle it.
Yeah, Hogarth is
a piece of work.
Very interesting character.
Yes, I was curious how that was going to go exactly. Yeah,
I knew how it was going to go as soon as it happened, because it was pretty predictable. It was maybe the one piece of the thing I actually actively did not like.
Well, I guess maybe later on, I kind of got the sense that she was going to decide to try to get Kilgrave to help her out with her divorce proceedings. But even before that, it was when so Hope discovers that she's pregnant with Kilgrave's baby, and Hogarth helps to cause a forced miscarriage with some medication. But then she bribes a nurse to say, collect the DNA from the stillbirth. And I was wondering if this was going to be something like Hogarth actually does manage to somehow simulate Kilgrave's power and tries to go on a rampage of her own. But it didn't quite work out that way. I think the way that it worked out was definitely interesting in its own right.
Well,
but
here's something that I think was just like way, way, way more terrifying. Imagine a lawyer with Kilgrave's power.
Oh, yeah. Which,
Kilgrave
again,
is stupid. This is the thing to keep in mind. Kilgrave has the most powerful ability of the Marvel Universe that we've seen so far.
Right, yeah.
To a degree.
Mm-hmm.
He's an idiot.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he could do so much with his power, but he wants short-term, selfish gains and stuff.
Right.
Hogarth could convince people, to do things without letting them know she's convincing them forcibly.
Exactly. And to me, my all-time favorite it's an interesting way of phrasing it. My favorite Kilgrave suggestion of the entire series kind of shows how he has so much more potential and doesn't even realize it. Where Jessica Jones is going to admit to this murder because she wants to put herself in a supermax facility, thinking that Kilgrave will come to her, and that'll be a way to trap him. But he figures out what she's doing, and he goes to the police station and tells all the police officers to hold each other at gunpoint. And then so he has this out with Jessica. He's making his offer that I'm not going to control you anymore. I want to try to make things work between us. And then so before he leaves, he says to all the police officers, in 30 seconds, you will all realize this was a hilarious joke and let Jessica go. And he walks away, and there's just this long, tense pause. And then all the police officers burst out laughing.
Yeah. And it's a thing, because none of those police officers will want to admit what happened.
Exactly. And it shows how, perhaps you could argue as a character thing, is that as he was, it's probably complicated commands like that took time for him to figure out how to do. But that was sort of a way to establish longer term control, that he muddies the waters so much that the victims of his control in that instance aren't going to want to think too much about it.
Right. With Coat Dude, instead of hey, give me your coat, he could have said, you don't want to see someone cold tonight. You
right.
Give me your coat. So
exactly. You feel like such a good person for being so generous and walk it off.
There's some because he wouldn't want to admit he's controlled at that point. His psyche would want to say, yeah, you know what, you are a good person.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so he doesn't have that deeper level, and I think that might be sort of, he got too much power too fast. He's never had to justify himself. The line that he says when he's trying to buy the house legitimately is most of the time I just say things and they happen. And if you've lived like that your entire life, it's really hard to perhaps psychologically go to that next step where you can start to play around with people's thoughts in ways that can make your control more long term, as by playing their own ego against them.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that.
And I think this we can jump ahead because I think this plays into some of my feelings about how the show ends. With how they finally kill Kilgrave. And I was curious at first how you felt about that.
I think it was actually done probably the perfect way. Kilgrave was not going to let her get close to him, unless she could make him believe that he had control. Because he was a cautious man. He wasn't smart. He was very cautious.
He was very cautious, and I think it made it a very poetic end. That his undoing was that he never could get past that point where he was, he never really could read people. He never really understood people. So after you got rid of his initial caution, then he just completely exposed himself. I kind of wished that they had raised the stakes a bit and made it so that Jessica did become susceptible to him again and found some clever way to get over it. As a matter of fact, after the first couple of episodes, I had this idea in my head that it was going to be something like Kilgrave has Luke Cage pointing a gun to his head and is trying to get her to submit willingly or something like that, and he doesn't realize that Luke Cage can take a bullet, and that gives her the opportunity to finish him off. But
see, I'm glad they didn't do the Luke Cage thing. I'm glad she never became susceptible to his powers again, because I think metaphorically what that was supposed to be was she could see through his pretty bullshit, basically.
Yeah, I can agree with that. That it works from that thematic standpoint, certainly.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested if they're going to try to get into a sort of comic book explanation for why she became immune to his powers, because they never really explored that too much. I do have a working theory, but what were you going to say?
My working theory, I have another working theory too on that one. It's that she has a healing factor.
Right.
And it was a virus, so her immune system just over time, because she was exposed to it for like over a year straight, became immune to it.
Yeah, that's more or less what I had in mind. My theory, I guess, is slightly different in that I was thinking that her powers might have been sort of adaptive, because they always seem to point out that her powers didn't manifest until after the accident. And so I was thinking it was like her body, after the automobile accident, overcompensated in its healing to make her much stronger and more resilient. And then in the same way that her body starts to overheal itself against Kilgrave's abilities. And that, yeah, led to her immunity. It's pretty much variations of the same idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about changing it from pheromones to a virus. I'm kind of happy they didn't do pheromones because humans don't work like that.
Yeah, exactly.
At the same time, a virus doesn't make much sense either because viruses don't.
Yeah, there's none of those. Pheromones sort of make sense in the idea that if they worked that way for humans, you could imagine that they would have the almost instantaneous effects. But a virus takes time to infect your system and all of that.
And not only that, but how does the virus differentiate one voice from another?
Right.
There's a lot of mechanics that don't make much sense with that. And you know what? That's okay. It's a comic book. I'm not going to sit here and complain about comic book.
Yeah, exactly. Some comic book hand-waving is okay here and there.
One thing I'm really glad they did do, though, is there was no super anchoring. If Jessica Jones got, like, someone pushing against her, she couldn't stop them from pushing her. Because,
right.
You know, it doesn't matter how strong you are, there's friction on your feet.
Yeah, you saw that there's a couple of times when you would see that she was up against a force like that and her feet started sliding across the ground.
Yeah, she could physically take it, but...
It was an interesting choice. I'm curious if they made this for a thematic choice or just for a practicality choice, but in the comic books, the character Jessica Jones is based on can fly. And they nerfed that power for her here in the show. And that might just have been because it would have been too expensive for them to have a bunch of flying scenes. But
maybe.
But it almost felt to me, just from the limited exposure I had to the Purple Man in the comics, that they actually sort of bumped Kilgrave's powers up a little bit too in terms of the longevity.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just sort of a minor observation of an adaptation issue.
Another thing I really like that they did in the adaptation over the comic books is and this is something I could be entirely wrong here. I haven't read all the comics. If there's someone out there who's a huge Marvel nerd, don't kill me, please. But in the comics, he's kind of just, a lecherous pervert all the time, and he's really this gross scum of a human who has no redeemable qualities whatsoever.
Right,
and I'm kind of glad that in the adaptation, he's not perverted. He doesn't know better to some degree. I mean, he knows.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But he's not asking for, like, I'm gonna have, a threesome every night just because I can.
Right. Well, I think the way that he's portrayed in the comics, I just assumed that Chris Claremont was in the next cubicle over and he started rubbing off on the guys who were writing Purple Man.
Yeah, that's what it seems like, doesn't it?
Marvel Comics had a tendency to fetishize the hell out of everything.
Which, I mean, cool. We can understand that.
Exactly. But you just did remind me, again, my favorite Kilgrave scene in terms of revealing his character is sort of a halfway adaptation from the comics. In the comic series, as Jessica Jones is revealing her story to Luke Cage, she's talking about what happened to her, and she reveals that the Purple Man never had sex with her once. But he would make her beg him to sleep with her over and over again, and then he would take pleasure out of turning her down. And there's a scene right in that last episode where Kilgrave is just getting even more and more obsessed with Jessica, and he has this scene where he's leaning over the balcony, sort of fantasizing about what he's going to do to her after he gets her under control. And he says that as one of the possible comeuppances for her once he's finally mind-controlled her again, that he'll make her want him so much and then turn her down over and over again.
Yeah, vengeance.
That deep vengeance, sadistic, manipulative side of him that makes him he's not likable in any way, but that makes him amazing as a villain.
I disagree. He's super likable. The performance is really good. He's a monster.
Right. He's a wonderful monster.
And but, if I see anyone trying to like quote him or saying, "Oh yeah, he's super cool," I want to be like, no.
And that's no. That's what I mean. He's not really likable in that sense. Like, especially there's a lot of animes where there becomes these huge fan base for these particular characters, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? This character is a scumbag. And I think that David Tennant is good enough at showing that inner scumbag, that the amount of pro Kilgrave opinion out there is not going to be quite as high.
Yeah, there was actually a really really interesting article I saw comparing the Doctor to Kilgrave and explaining how Kilgrave is basically an inverse of the Doctor. The reason the Doctor is so attractive is because he represents freedom. You can go anywhere, you can do anything, nothing can stop him. Mm-hmm. His special power is he has a device that lets him open doors.
That's awesome, yeah.
Yeah, and then Kilgrave is the inverse. He's slavery. He is, inescapable.
And how ironic that the greatest villain that the Doctor ever faces calls himself the Master.
Yeah. And the Master is always known as being a bit hypnotic.
Exactly.
But I mean, the thing, if you really think about it, is the Doctor kind of abusive in some ways for saying, "Oh, you can do all these things, and I'm going to put you in these, these risky situations where you might die."
Right. And, you could have sort of I think there's a lot of different ways that you could approach that. I could see an argument that it's sort of the balance between freedom and safety, is that he does offer you absolute freedom, but that often means that you're going to find yourself in extremely perilous situations if you're following him. And the Doctor is always the one, if you said, okay, park the TARDIS back, I need to get off. He's not, the Doctor's not going to say, no, we got to go on to this next place.
Yeah, that is true. The Doctor will let you leave at any time. I don't really have much more to say on Jessica Jones. Like, I've been inspired by it. I'm making a little short story based off of someone who has the inverse of his powers, which is
interesting.
If you state anything around her that you're going to do something around her, you end up having to do that thing to its literal definition.
Yes, I remember another one of the woe is me moments Kilgrave is saying is, do you know how hard it is to carefully control every word I say? I once told a man to go screw himself. Imagine that.
Yeah.
That was at least one thing is Kilgrave, and I guess this can be another one of the ways that his power makes it harder for him to redeem himself, is he can't turn it off.
He can't. No, he doesn't have control over it.
He's sort of like Rogue in that sense. He has one of these powers that he's constantly has to monitor himself if he wants to be a good person, and so it becomes that much easier to decide not to be.
Because we're talking about this, I'm going to suggest a worm to anyone who really likes superhero type stuff and kind of likes that kind of a double-edged power. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Tell me. Oh, it's a comic called The Worm.
No. It's a web series.
Okay. I've not heard of this. No, I'll have to check that out.
It's a novel type thing. It is 1,680,000 words long.
Oh, wow.
It was written in 2 years.
Oh, jeez.
I don't know how this guy did it. I've just started reading it recently. I'm playing in like a Fate campaign based around it. And someone's like a giant fan of it. And it's interesting. It needs edited. It needs a lot of things. It needs facing issues. It has a lot of issues. But it's really interesting how they deal with powers and the drawbacks and just everything that comes with it.
Yeah. I did have one last thing to say. It's not related directly to the Jessica Jones plot, but it's sort of an atmospheric thing I noticed with the Marvel Expanded Universe. You know how they can't say mutant on any of these Marvel Universe shows because Fox has the rights to the X-Men, and that includes ever using the term mutant.
Yeah.
And this has led to a lot of consternation. I've heard stories that they're starting to de-emphasize mutants in the comics because of this reason, because they want to keep all the money for themselves. But I noticed from the reactions that you see to Jessica and others in this show that Marvel has basically said, oh, so we can't say mutants? Well, screw you. We're going to call them gifted, and people are going to react to them just the same.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but...
I have not. I watched the first season and half of the second. I needed to get back into it, but...
It's okay. I know that's such a good recommendation. I recommend Flash.
Well, that's the... Oh, I watched The Flash, the first season
super
of
good.
Flash. I had a few problems with The Flash. I think, tone-wise, it was really nice. It's sort of a fun Silver Age kind of story, which is a good change of pace from all the dark, brooding stuff that DC has been putting out.
Yeah.
I just... They are so bad at science.
No, they are. I'm not even going to pretend they aren't.
It's like, they're not even trying. I mean, there's technobabble, and there's bullshit, and then there's the Flash, where it's like, in the very first episode, the scientist is explaining, the reactor released all of these things, antimatter, isotopes, X elements, and the Flash looks back and says, those are all theoretical. And I stop and says, antimatter isn't theoretical.
Right, we've observed antimatter. So now that you've all learned a little science lesson,
I think
we're probably going to leave you with that.
Yeah, we're all set. I hope that you've already watched Jessica Jones, because in this latter half we've spoiled the hell out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good enough show that even if you come into it spoiled, you're going to enjoy it.
I think so. Yeah.
Like, a lot of people have some issues with, like, maybe some of the excuses they have for things or why things weren't done, but I think those people are silly.
Right, yeah. I guess I remember the only exposure I had to Jessica Jones, the comic, was the 2 panels that you would find on various sites, which was her telling her backstory of being stolen by Kilgrave.
Yeah.
And so my reaction when I first learned about this show is I see on Netflix, there's some new Marvel show called Jessica Jones. Hey, that sounds familiar. Wait a minute. And just being tickled that, there's going to be an entire show based around mind control now.
Yeah, I haven't been part of the community for a while, so I'm wondering if there was a big uproar when it was announced or whatever, but I don't know. I hope people enjoyed it to some degree. I hope no one sexualized it, because,
I think it's inevitable you're going to find some sexualization of it somewhere, but I think that they did a very good job emphasizing the horror of his power, that it's not going to be so widespread.
Yeah, I've actually been noticing that a lot with, I guess people I hang around, which can be kind of difficult to really say, I've noticed this from my peer group, that people, people seem to be thinking about mind control in an entirely different way than we thought about it in the 90s, for instance. It's not so much an excuse anymore, it's being realized as something that's kind of terrifying, just inherently.
That's right. Yeah, that's something that I think some people in the community have dealt with a long time. That's sort of what I thought was most interesting about a show that was so centered with mind control, is that it starts bringing up sort of implications that the MC community has been sort of grappling with all this time, and now all of these art discussions are sort of becoming mainstream thanks to this series.
Yeah. Thankfully, our little community's not that. I don't know. Sometimes when I look on Tumblr, oh my god. There's a lot of fetishists I didn't know existed because, things have changed. It's a different world than 2006. Oh god, no, 2007.
Yeah, I'm really happy that the show has come out. I understand entirely that they needed to kill Kilgrave at the end of the show, though I can't help but be a tiny bit disappointed that they were not able to put him into rotation, like as to show up in other programs.
I'm glad they didn't. David Tennant's way too busy, anyways.
That's I was thinking about that in that sense. He is very busy, but he also he's got enough star power that I could plausibly see him showing up in another program.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I would not have been as happy with Jessica Jones the show if Kilgrave didn't get killed at the end of it.
Yeah.
The entire show was leading up to that as the inevitable conclusion.
Anyways, we're gonna wrap that up here. I hope to see from you guys. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe you'll hear from me again soon. Probably we're gonna start trying to do this more regularly. Yeah,
happily. We'll start finding other stuff to talk about and get this to become a regular thing.
Yeah, I'd really enjoy that. I need that motivation.
Okay, so we'll see you next time.
Yep, see you next time.
Bye-bye. A special thanks to Brian Michael Bendis and Michael Gaydos for the creation of Alias, the comic Jessica Jones is adapted from. Check out Jessica Jones on Netflix. It'll be a great ride, even after we've spoiled it. The intro and outro of this episode is Cool Vibes by Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons. That's all for this episode. You'll find this podcast is over in 3,